Soltz, co-founder and chairman of VoteVets.org, he was a captain in Iraq, and they are critical of the execution of the wars in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Pete, what did you make of that? I gathered you supported the president's speech tonight.
Yes, I did. I mean, at the core of his speech and the core of his plan were absolutely correct. At the end of the day, he listened for the most part to his commanders on the ground, and the responses from McChrystal and Petraeus, publicly and privately, are that they fully support the plan that he's laid out and believe it can be implemented. He stood up in the face of great pressure from all sides and said, I believe in the importance of this mission, and I'm going to give my commanders what they need, and we're going to ask our allies to pitch in as well. So at the end of the day, yeah, I've got problems with the fact that he talked about a timeline and setting a timeline and hedged on some other issues and made some other statements that weren't as robust as they could be. But bottom line, he's committed more troops. He's doubled the amount that President Bush had there. We'll have almost 100,000 a year from now, and given our men and women on the ground a fighting chance to take the fight to the enemy and make sure there's no haven for al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, that's a great thing, and the president deserves our support in going forward on this.
John, did he at all sway you?
Well, the speech really leaves a lot more questions than answers. I mean, other than the fact that he pinned this whole thing on President Bush, rightfully so, it really didn't answer anything in the speech. With VoteVets, when we talk to our members, there's real concern. This administration has done some things for the troops that the Bush administration hadn't done. They stopped the stop-loss policy. They want to give you 2 years of dwell time. When you really add up the math here, without expediting our withdrawal from Iraq, obviously a war we should never have fought, and you add the numbers of the 5 or 6 new brigades we're going to see in Afghanistan, you almost put us at pre-surge levels or at surge levels from an op-tempo standpoint. And, I'm just not quite sure the Obama administration, they talk a lot about sacrifice, but what that really means for our warfighters and for their families. I mean, at the end of the day, someone has to go and fight. And I really believe, the Karzai election and the corruption that was involved there is a real game changer on the ground. And I don't think he's really held that government's feet to the fire. And are we in a situation now where you've got young Americans fighting and dying, involved in a civil conflict where there's corruption involved with the indigenous government? And I would prefer him to have taken a much harder line with the president of Afghanistan.
Pete, don't you ever have second thoughts about maybe this could be a mistake?
Sure. I mean, everyone has second thoughts. You have second thoughts when I was on the ground in Iraq. Can this possibly happen? But when you look at the fundamentals on the ground, you have to create the possibility for the government to stand up. You have to bring the violence down, defeat the enemy to the point where political progress is possible. And that's where, for all the statements he made dragging us through the mud of Bush in Iraq, he ultimately has learned the lessons of the surge in Iraq, which President then Senator Obama opposed. He learned that there is a military component to bringing about the conditions where governments, whether Iraqi or Afghani, that are at times corrupt and not as capable as we'd like them to be, can prepare to stand up and provide the services so we can bring our guys home. That's the whole point. Increase with a smart counterinsurgency strategy so that we can eventually create the conditions for Afghanis or Iraqis to fight themselves. And that's another important thing President Obama addressed, is we're really going to robustly try to train Afghan National Police, Afghan National Army, to ensure that they're able to take over. And to John's point, we've got an all-volunteer military. Everybody signing up today knows that they're signing up to either go and fight, be prepared to fight, or trained to fight. That's the nature of the situation we're in as a country. President Obama has made a call to our military to finish this job and to execute it, and I think it's incumbent upon us to do everything we can to win. Let our generation win the fights we're sent to go win.
John, respond.
Well, I think Pete brings up some important points the public needs to debate, which is first the counterinsurgency strategy. Counterinsurgency strategy is a failing strategy for the United States. Pete talks about a volunteer force.
John,
this is absolutely
that's what
correct.
turned it in
Excuse
Iraq.
me, Pete.
Let
I'm
him
answering
finish,
his
Pete.
question. Thank you.
I will.
The counterinsurgency strategy, it's a failing strategy because we're not a nation at war. We're a military at war. And obviously, I would have felt a lot more comfortable tonight if the president was willing, there's a debate about going all in. This is not an all-in strategy. This is a partially in strategy. Why put, 5 or 6 more combat brigades on the ground for 18 months? That is beyond me. A counterinsurgency strategy will rely on hundreds of thousands of troops to secure the population, a very rural population in Afghanistan that wasn't like Iraq. So when you look at what it would take to sustain a counterinsurgency strategy in Iraq or Afghanistan, we should be having a conversation in this country about doubling the size of our Army divisions from 10 to 20, or from 3 Marine Corps divisions to 6. Or how are we going to pay for this war rather than put it on the credit card for our kids? These are the fundamental dynamics that would be important for us to sustain a counterinsurgency strategy. It is a failing strategy. It's this idea of the democracy for peace theory, building democracies, creating these institutions. You can't just build a democracy. And in regards to the Afghan army, this is a critical statement. If you look at the armies we've tried to build in the Arab world, we've had huge problems, not just in Iraq, but in Lebanon, where Hezbollah is stronger than the Western-backed military. Professional militaries take years to grow. Institutions that support the democracy have to be there. Corruption is a huge problem to prevent that. So building an Afghan army in an 18-month window that somehow is going to be capable, you know, where 1 in 10 people in the army are literate, it's a huge challenge. It's even harder than Iraq.
Let me get a break, John. Then two distinguished generals will join us next. Don't go away.